Today I would like to talk about acceptance and rejection. These are terms that we use in the Buddhist tradition, and these are terms that have a strong validity, they have a strong place in our practice. They have to be utilized very firmly. There's a great deal of talk, especially in preliminary practice, about what one should accept and what one should reject. And in preliminary practice, there is a great deal of removing gross defilements, if you will, or very heavy ego clingings. Now, actually, that kind of acceptance and rejection we'll put aside and talk for a moment, because actually there is a kind of acceptance and rejection that we do constantly on a very ordinary level as adult human beings. And this acceptance and rejection is something that is involved with perception. It's something that continues constantly, and it's something that we're always doing. In fact, it is so deeply ingrained in the fabric of our perceptual process, so deeply ingrained in the fabric of our mind stream that we do not recognize until we stop and think that we're actually doing it. This acceptance and rejection has to do with the foundational belief in self-nature as being inherently real. Now, Lord Buddha describes enlightenment as a process during which one awakens to the primordial wisdom state. One awakens to the state in such a way that one realizes the image that one has of self-nature and all of the conceptualizations associated with self-nature are illusory. That in fact, that which we call self is not our nature at all. But in Buddhahood, one becomes awakened to this state of pure luminosity, this state which is empty of self-nature and all such contrivance. It is a state that is free and pure of any constriction and ideation that would formulate it into thingness. It is described as being innately wakeful, not cold and black like voidness, but luminous. And I want to say dynamic, but then when we hear the word dynamic, we think of something being dynamic. Think instead of a state of pure luminosity that is empty of all conceptualization. A state which is empty of self-nature, but not void. In Buddhahood, one awakens to that nature, and one realizes the illusory quality of all conceptualization that takes place based on the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. Now, for ordinary sentient beings such as ourselves, when we engage in ordinary perception, every piece of perception that we engage in is based on the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. That is the sort of primal supposition, foundational supposition. It is from that all our perceptual processes arise. Anything that we use to measure or to think about arises from that foundational view of self-nature as being inherently real. If you think about the five senses, how do the five senses judge? And forgive me for saying this again, those of you that have had this teaching several times, but I feel that it's necessary to reiterate. These five senses that we take for granted, we look and see what is happening with these five senses. These five senses are based on the foundational belief in self-nature as being inherently real. If we see distance as relative to self. If we see an event happening, we see the event happening relative to self. That is the only way that we perceive. Hot is relative to self. Cold is relative to self. any feeling, any thought perceived is relative to self. There is no other kind of feeling, perception, or thought. Even when one has an experience, let's say in one's meditation, one always instantly rises to that place where one says, I am having this experience. This must be good. I'm having it now. That kind of thing. So one always returns to that kind of foundation. In that process of perception, which is based on the belief in self-nature as being inherently real, one is constantly accepting or rejecting. There is nothing that we perceive, either inwardly or outwardly, that is not filled with that process. You never see an item without deciding if it's attractive or repulsive to you. Try this for yourself. If you don't believe me, and you shouldn't take anything on faith, you should look at it for yourself and see if it's reasonable. Try it for yourself in this way. Get a friend, or perhaps an acquaintance, someone you hardly know, or perhaps someone you've never met before, have only just seen briefly. Pick a person in this room and ask them to remain in a room all by themselves. When you leave, then walk into the room and look at that person. Watch what your mind does. You look at their body form. It's either agreeable to you or disagreeable. You look at their hair. You look at their facial expression. You get a feeling from them. Every single piece of perception that occurs at that time has to do with acceptance or rejection. Even if you've learned the skill of very quickly going behind yourself and saying, I love everybody. I'm into the, Rogerian positive regard. I'm into this. I'm going to do this. I love everybody. Even if you do that, the only reason why you have to think about doing that is because you've already done the acceptance or rejection thing. Otherwise, you wouldn't have to think about it. You would be Mr. Rogerian, whatever that means. So having done this already, whatever you do with your thoughts after that time, you have already done this. And furthermore, you should know that once you engage in a certain philosophy, like treating a person a certain way or having positive regard for a person, if you employ that kind of method, why are you doing that? You're doing that because you've already evaluated that method and you've either experienced acceptance or rejection about it. So it's one thing on top of another. And everything that we do has to do with acceptance or rejection. Having accepted that that is the case, we'll move on from there and see that from that immediate moment of acceptance or rejection, there comes from that moment almost like a rock falling into a pond, ripples of ideation, of conceptual processes that come from that place. They continue to engage and to develop themselves. They are the seed for more conceptualization process later on. They become part of you. You don't think something and then have it fall off the edge of the earth. We follow our thoughts, and we follow them with acceptance or rejection. We accept certain processes that we go through and make them part of us because we like them and we have deemed they're good. Or we discard others, and actually we don't have the skill of totally discarding them. They don't become gone. While we have followed them, while we make them something, they are still somewhere, even if they're in the discard pile. They still exist in that way. Until we come to recognize the pristine moment of pure cognition and learn how not to follow that process of acceptance or rejection, until we learn to stop using as a foundational basis the belief in self-nature as being inherently real, and therefore until we lose the need to constantly reinforce what self-nature is and what it looks like, we are engaged in this process and we follow our thoughts and follow ourselves. And we experience a continuum of selfness that we become fixated on. Fixated on. And that fixation, that place where one is fixated in, and all the movement that comes from that and within that, one believes to be one's experience, and one believes to be oneself. So that there is no natural experience of the primordial wisdom state, no natural experience of that pure luminosity that is our nature. There is no spaciousness in our minds. No direct view. And that's because we are constantly involved in this foundational belief in self-nature as being inherently real, and this constant jumping off from that place, this constant continuum of experience that really is, if you look at it, the perceptual process and exaggeration of that process and development of that process that comes from this belief, which, according to the Buddha, who I feel like really knows, according to the Buddha, is an erroneous experience to begin with. Since the nature is not that self-nature that we have developed in our conceptual menu, recipe, our conceptual stew that we're cooking up all the time, but that nature is the pure luminosity that we never see because we are so fixated on the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. So in the meantime, we continue to be engaged in acceptance and rejection. Now what happens here? Now according to the Buddha, now this is an interesting teaching. According to the Buddha, we are all in cyclic existence. And we are totally involved in cyclic existence. Completely in it. To the point where there's no escape. We have not, unless we apply an exacting technology given to us by something like a Buddha that has attained realization enough to be removed from that fixation on the continuum, we have no way, there is no technology by which we can remove ourselves from the experience of cyclic existence. We're constantly in it. We're constantly revolving in it. One experience makes another, builds another, makes another thought, makes another exaggeration, and it continues like that. See? In order for us to remove ourselves from that experience, we have to apply something that cuts through it. We have to apply something that cuts through this constant acceptance and rejection. And we have to the only way that one would cut through this constant process of acceptance and rejection is to meditate or to find a way to develop spaciousness within one's mind so that one does not automatically engage in this perceptual process. In that moment of spaciousness, there is the potential, it's a very deep and rich potential to have the experience of true nature. And having had that experience of true nature, one like naturally falls out of the continuum. It doesn't, you don't demolish the continuum, you have to beat it up. It isn't like that. The continuum continues so long as you continue it, you see? I mean, that's the big joke about it all. It continues as long as you continue it. If the continuum stops, it simply stops. And so the technique then is to develop the spaciousness within the mind to perceive directly the primordial wisdom state, primordial nature. According to the Buddha, we are so constantly involved in this state that we can have and have had no direct I mean, in this process that we can have and have not yet had, we cannot have and have not yet had any taste of the nature, of the true nature. So completely involved in this process already. According to the Buddha as well, anything that is begun in cyclic existence, any process that has begun, any thought, any perception, any experience that has begun after that first foundational acceptance of ego, of self-nature as being inherently real, that is ordinary relative perception. It exists within cyclic existence. It is built from that first acceptance of the ego. Everything that we've ever experienced after that moment is within that realm. It has ordinary causes and effects. I mean, you could, if you took the time and had the kind of awareness that could progress through moments, even hidden moments, moments that you could not see, and also look past into past experiences that you've had even before this lifetime, in terms of reincarnational experiences. If you had that ability, you would be able to trace everything that's happening to you now to some cause and effect relationship. Every single thing. The way you're feeling now, whether you're feeling good about yourself or bad about yourself, what's happening in your life, all of these different things. Everything that you have, everything that you don't have, what you look like. Every single experience. You could trace back and you could find the exact cause and effect relationships that have brought this moment about. According to the Buddha, all of these moments follow one another and are within the continuum of cyclic existence. They are then ordinary. They have ordinary cause and effect relationships that bring them, even though they seem spectacular. I mean, let's say one of us won the lotto here tomorrow, and we were multi-millionaires. That would seem, I mean, there's anyone here that wouldn't say that was totally spectacular. Isn't that right? We would think that was totally spectacular. But according to the Buddha, that is ordinary. It's ordinary simply because, according to his way of measuring ordinary, it fits right in there. There are exacting cause and effect relationships that have caused this thing to be. On a relative view, someone picked your number. On a deeper view, in the past, you must have been extremely generous. You must have been incredibly virtuous at some time in order to produce this fruit. You planted a seed somewhere, perhaps not in this life, but in a previous incarnation. And now the seed has ripened. So it's very simple. It's very down to earth. It's very simple how your life is. There are no mysteries about it. Even the greatly neurotic parts, even the parts that drive you crazy, even the parts that you think, this could only happen to me, and why am I like this? Every single one of them can be traced down to exacting cause and effect relationships. Therefore, an exacting antidote can be applied. Likewise, if at this time suddenly you lost all of your money, let's say you had been playing into stock markets or something, and everything crashed, everything went away, and all of your money was gone. You would think that was the opposite of incredibly spectacular, but just as meaningful, wouldn't you? It would kind of kick out your knees, wouldn't it? And the first thing that you would do is roll your eyes heavenward and think, where did this come from? How could this happen to me? Well, how this could happen to you, according to the Buddha, is in a very natural way. At some time in the past, if not in this lifetime, then in some previous incarnation, you took from someone else. Took something very precious, something very valuable. Probably to the degree that you feel the knees have been knocked out from under you, that person felt the same. It's the same story for those that are chronically poor. But what this tells us is not, we don't want to dwell on what happened in the past. The past is past. We can't change that. But what we can do is to apply the opposite measure. We can apply the antidote. And so finding that we have been made rich by the lotto, we now look to be extremely generous. And in being extremely generous, we can be sure that we will win the lotto again in our next life, if they have them. If not, it'll come about some other way. On that you can depend. To practice in some way is to perpetuate good is a reasonable thing to do. Also, to practice in such a way that one applies the antidote is a reasonable thing to do. If one finds oneself in a position of poverty, if one really finds oneself stuck, really cut from behind, the antidote that one would apply really would be generosity. Extraordinary generosity. Now, once all your money's gone, it may be hard to apply financial generosity, but one could apply generosity of a different kind. And when one recovers, one could practice in such a way that one could include financial generosity in one's repertoire of practice. In the meantime, one could do exactly what I told the children to do. Wish that others had more. If you see someone with something you like, wish they had twice as much, 3 times as much. Meditate on their happiness. Think like that. It will ripen within the mind stream. Now, what does this have to do with acceptance and rejection? We are constantly involved in a very diluted process of acceptance and rejection. It's diluted in that it's a habitual tendency, it's a knee-jerk reaction. We have not one moment of spaciousness in which to decide if this is what we really want to do. We are constantly reacting anyway, constantly accepting and rejecting. It's the basis of our continuum. It's the natural outgrowth of ego clinging and the erroneous supposition of self-nature as being inherently real. In Buddhist tradition, one can apply another kind of acceptance and rejection. It's a more intelligent one. One can apply acceptance in this way. One can gather together in one's life as though one were a basket of truth. One can gather together in one's life the precepts that help one to understand what the score really is. One can really study philosophy and understand how cause and effect relationship really comes about, and not bury one's head in the sand. Really get into it, really see that the fruit, the seeds that one plants at this time bear the fruit later that one will eat, and you will eat it. So one has to gather together these things, these kinds of understandings, and one has to think it through, how to apply the necessary antidotes. One accepts, one brings, one picks up these methods that are true and correct. In the Buddhist teaching, the Buddha says again and again that one should apply, one should gather together, one should accumulate meritorious activity. We're constantly involved in that. Here in the temple, sometimes we work ourselves to death doing meritorious activity. We do different programs around here. Lots of teachings take place. The students are always involved in making things and building things and cleaning things up and working so that other people can be happy and feel welcome here. Students are always involved in things like that. There's lots of upkeep things that we have to do. That is meritorious activity that propagates the Dharma, or that assists the Dharma in its movement. It's very meritorious. From the Buddhist teaching, from the Buddhist point of view, the reason why it's so meritorious is because the Dharma really isn't ordinary. It is that which arises from the mind of enlightenment and succeeds in creating the state of enlightenment. So the Dharma is really special. The students, therefore, are involved in that. We are involved in supporting this temple. It's a very difficult thing to do. We work very hard at it. And that is a very meritorious activity. We could be putting our money into other things, things that are maybe more pleasurable in an ordinary sense. But we tend to put our money into maintaining this place so that the Dharma can be propagated. We are involved in practices that have to do, that we call bodhichitta, that is practices in which one practices long and hard, I mean really long and hard hours, lots of mantra, lots of recitation, lots of visualization, lots of meditation. And one takes that, the merit of that practice, and offers it to sentient beings. One gives it to sentient beings. Offers it. And of course that means that we are not diminished in our own merit. But that's not the point. The point is that you practice for the sake of others. And here in this place we practice 24 hours a day for the sake of others. There's always someone in that room, the one that's under the staircase, practicing 24 hours a day. That means nighttime too. And that's what we do. That's gathering merit. That's producing a meritorious life. And we are doing this because we have accepted, and we are gathering these things, and we are picking up these things that produce happiness, that produce the ultimate result, enlightenment. These are the things that produce the cessation of suffering. These are the things that produce the ultimate goal that is held by self and also by others. And so these are the things that we accept. And then we go through a process of rejecting. We really try to look at ourselves in a very honest way and reject those habitual tendencies that bear no fruit. For instance, the tendency to say, well, I can't change, I'm just like that. What did you think you were going to get from saying that? How could that be good for you? What can that do except to allow you to stay within a certain zone of comfort for a short period of time until the fruit of that ripens? Or the kinds of behavior in which we ignore ourselves and just don't look and see that we are being unkind. We are being less than generous. We are not using what we have to benefit others. We are being mean-tempered, small-minded, narrow in our focus, and just flat-out ornery most of the time. Those kinds of things. We don't examine those things. We just let ourselves be. We let ourselves slide. What are the little games that we play in our minds so that we can continue to do that? What do? We say, I'm too tired. I don't feel like being nice today. I'm in a bad mood. I have a hormonal imbalance. I have PMS syndrome. My mother was mean to me 20 years ago. All right? I don't feel good about myself. Therefore, I have permission, since I'm neurotic, to feel bad about you. These kinds of things. And we allow ourselves to continue in this. What can you think they're going to do for you? What can you be thinking of? What can be in your mind when you let yourself do this? See, I'll do this long enough, and pretty soon it will feel good. Is that what you're thinking? Or maybe I'll do this long enough and I'll be just so pathetic that someone will come with medicine and they'll just cure me. Or maybe they'll just end my suffering, or some knight in white armor will come and make everything. I don't know what we're thinking. What are we thinking of? Have you ever asked yourself that? What can you be thinking of? Have you ever watched yourself do what you do? I mean, really watched yourself do what you do and go, that can't be me. What am I thinking of? What's in my mind when I'm like this? What do I think is going to happen? What do you think is going to happen? Reminds me of being on a diet. Yesterday I had chocolate cake at my daughter's birthday. And I've been on a diet for a long time. I've been really watching myself. I've been really trying to do well. And I have done very well. So I ate this chocolate cake. And at the end of it I thought of myself, what can you be thinking of? Where do you think this is going to go? Do you think it's going to disappear? Do you think that it's not going to be here anymore? Do you think it's not going to stay where you don't want it to stay? What can you think is going to happen here? We all do this. I confess to doing it myself. But we have to reject that process. We have to reject that tendency. We have to pick up what we need to do and reject those things that are fruitless, that lead to nothing but brick walls. See what I'm saying? And it's not an easy thing to do because it requires our being honest, just like those little kids were honest when I asked them how they felt when their friends had new toys. That's so hard, isn't it? Isn't that hard when you catch yourself doing that? Now, in Buddhist technology, we actually have a real technology about acceptance and rejection. Those things that lead to negativity and defilement and disruption and all kinds of problems and sufferings, these are the things that we reject. We pick up those, we take those ways of living and put them out. They're gone. And we bring to us, bring to us those methods that bring happiness, that bring fulfillment, that bring enlightenment. We have to go through a process of turning our minds, deciding for ourselves what works. It's all very reasonable. It's all very logical. Here's the clue. Here's something that you can really look at. All of those things that begin with ego clinging, all of those processes that we're involved in that are within the ordinary realm, that are within cyclic existence, that begin and end with ego clinging. Those ordinary things, and they're called ordinary things in Buddhist view, they are cause and effect things. They will always lead to ordinary result. There's no other way. That's all they can do. You cannot grow bananas from apple seeds. There are no magicians. Those things lead to ordinary result. If you want to stay within that realm, continue to live within that realm. You will be within that realm. That's the way it is. There is no day that comes out of nowhere and hits you upside the head during which you wake up, have your morning aura juice and say, "Yo, I'm enlightened! It just hit me." It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen that way. If you continue to engage in ordinary cause and effect relationships, you will have ordinary results. That's it. On the other hand, if you apply the wisdom and knowledge, the technology that arises from the mind of enlightenment, it will produce the state of enlightenment. And that is why in choosing a path, it is always suggested that you look at the source and see for yourself. Is the source fully realized? Is it fully free? Is it coming from a place of clear and true perception? And is that what my goal is? In our path, we look to the Buddha and we know that this is so. We have seen that the Buddha has attained full enlightenment. Secondarily, we look to see, is there a path that remains? There are world religions in which, at least I feel, and this is my private opinion, they have begun with highly realized beings. But there isn't a path that remains. There's no technology for stabilizing the mind, for practicing bodhichitta, for practicing in such a way that one realizes the non-dual state of emptiness and luminosity, of wisdom and compassion. There is no meditation, there is no practice that one can engage in to bring that about. And while it has begun with a highly realized being, there's no method. So you have to find out for yourself, does it come from an enlightened being? Is there a method? Is that method available to me? I mean, realistically, can I get to it? Is it taught by someone I can relate to? Can I find a way to make the whole scene work for me? Because if I can make it work for me, then I can accept this. I can pick it up. I can apply it. And it has to be a logical process. And if we don't go through this logical process, we will trip ourselves up later on. We have to take the time to do that. You can't fall in love with an idea and just do it that way. You can't get a whiff of it and just follow it down the road. It's not like that. You don't depend on those feelings. They're not enough. You have to think for yourself. What's reasonable? What's there? What do I have? Where does it come from? And then from that, and on that basis, you can decide what is the life that I take up? What are the precious things that I take up? What is the value that I take as my own? What do I make work for me? This is the basis, really, on which one begins to practice the path. And so, of course, here we have a group of people who are beginning students. Some of you are doing just that. You're looking around and you're thinking. But some of you are reacting in your habitual way. You're sort of going with it because it feels good, or maybe, well, I'd like to be a Buddhist, or, well, I'd like to meditate, or she sounds good, or it feels all right, or whatever. That's not a good way. It won't last. You will burn hot and fast like paper. You really should put yourself through this process of logical thought and of real observance, real bone-crushing, brutal observance of what you're doing in your mind. You have to look at yourself. You have to get to the point where it's so easy for you to do that you're like little Casey, who says, yep, my friend has a new toy, I'm jealous, I want it. You have to get to that point. And then you have to decide what you're going to do with it. Now, why am I giving this class also to these people who are ordained monks and nuns and who have been on this path for some time? Maybe you can tell me why. You think you need it? Yeah. I mean, don't you hear? Don't you hear that we're still needing to do that, just that very thing, to watch ourselves, to watch our minds? This is, by the way, is a process that never ends, not for any of us. If it ends, we're dead. We're not practicing anymore. We're doing something else, but we're not practicing. If there are any of you here that have practiced Dharma and like to go around saying, oh, I'm an old-time Dharma practitioner, I've been doing this for some time, I love that. But if you're not getting anything from this class, you've stopped practicing. I don't know when, but you have. It's true. If we're honest, we need it. I need it. I need to think about that very thing all the time, today, tomorrow. And we need to apply it and constantly put ourselves through that scrutiny and a constant acceptance and rejection, because don't we habitually fall back into the pit of continuing the continuum in a mindless and reactive way, accepting and rejecting in an ignorant way and forgetting what really produces results. I mean, don't you catch yourself thinking in a certain way or acting in a certain way, and you look at yourself and say, what could I have been thinking? What can this possibly get me except unhappiness? Don't you catch yourself in that way all the time? So it's for all of us. We are all beginners. We should never stop thinking like that. Never. Not for a moment. If you practice Dharma all your life and practice the exact, succinct technology, at the time of your death, before you die, you should say, I only know a little about Dharma. And only when we truly attain the rainbow body and become ourselves a Buddha, and then appear in the world in emanation form in order to benefit others and bring them the path, can we think that we have done enough. And that's true for all of us. Nanda.